I didn't know who she was. That is the part nobody seems to believe when I tell the story now. They look at me with those eyes. Human eyes. Alien eyes. It doesn't matter. And they smile like I'm being modest. Like I knew exactly what I was doing when I reached into that cracked escape pod and pulled her out. Like it was calculated. Like it was brave. It wasn't any of those things. It was just a Tuesday. I had been salvaging wreckage near the shattered veil for about 6 hours when my scanner picked up a faint biological signature buried under about 40 meters of twisted ship debris. Most salvagers would have logged it, moved on, and told themselves the signal was probably a false read. The shattered veil was fresh wreckage from one of the biggest battles the galaxy had seen in a generation. There were a lot of false reads out there. There was a lot of everything out there, but the signal was warm. I told myself I was just being thorough, professional. I maneuvered my ship, the Obstinate, through the debris field with the kind of careful patience that years of frontier work teaches you, and I found her pod wedged between the broken spine of an Athari warship and a chunk of something I couldn't identify. The pod was cracked down one side. It was leaking atmosphere slowly, the way a punctured lung leaks air. Whatever was inside had maybe another 2 hours before the question answered itself. I cut her out. She was not what I expected. Most species I had encountered in frontier space were relatively close to human in basic structure. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head on top. The Athari were not. She had 4 upper limbs, 2 of which were badly broken and folded at angles that made my stomach turn. Her lower body was stronger, built for endurance, covered in a carapace that had once been a deep iridescent blue, but was now cracked and dull from trauma. Her face was dominated by large compound eyes, currently shut, and her breathing, when I pressed my ear close because my scanner was still deciding whether she was alive, came in shallow, rapid bursts that I did not recognize as a good sign in any species. I carried her to my medical bay, which is a generous name for a converted storage room with a cot, a supply cabinet, and a portable diagnostic unit that I had bought second-hand on Valdris Prime 3 years ago. The diagnostic unit did not recognize her species. I was not surprised. I reset it twice, got the same result twice, and then set it aside and used my own eyes. Both her upper right limbs were broken. There was a deep fracture running across the right side of her carapace that worried me more than anything else, because I did not know what was underneath. She had a gash above one of her compound eyes that was bleeding something dark and slow. Her body temperature, when I pressed the back of my hand against her carapace, felt wrong. Too low, or what I guessed was too low for something that had been alive enough to climb into an escape pod. I did what I could with what I had. I splinted her broken limbs with strips of metal framing and wrapped them with medical tape, the same way an old field instructor had shown me years ago on a training exercise that had no business being as dangerous as it turned out to be. I cleaned the gash above her eye with antiseptic spray. I covered the fracture in her carapace with a wound sealant I normally used for deep cuts, not knowing if it would help or make things worse, and deciding that doing something was better than doing nothing. Then I sat back, looked at what I had done, and thought, she's probably still going to die. She didn't. On the second day she woke up. I was in the co-pilot seat, eating a protein ration, when I heard movement from the back, and I went to check, and she was upright on the cot, with both her working limbs pressed flat against the wall behind her, and her compound eyes open and focused directly on me, with an expression I had no framework to read. I held up both my hands, palms out, the oldest signal in any body language, human or otherwise, and I said, slowly, "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She did not understand a word of it. She lunged forward and bit me on the forearm. It didn't break the skin. I think she was too weak to do real damage, or maybe she was holding back, or maybe Athari bites are not as severe as they look. Whatever the reason, I stepped back, looked at the bite mark, looked at her, and decided that if I had just dragged her back from the edge of death, she was allowed one free bite. I went to the galley, heated up a container of reconstituted chicken soup, the only warm food I had that didn't require explanation or preparation, and brought it back, and set it on the floor inside the doorway. Then I turned around and walked away. When I checked an hour later, the container was empty. That was the beginning of something I still don't have a clean word for. Over the following days, we built a language between us out of nothing. Gestures and expressions, and the kind of stubborn mutual observation that happens when two creatures with no common words decide they need to understand each other anyway. She pointed at things, and I named them. I pointed at things and she made sounds I slowly began to connect to meaning. She was sharp, frighteningly sharp. By the fourth day she had identified the pattern in my daily routine and was anticipating it. By the sixth day she had pointed at my star charts and traced a route with one careful limb that told me she knew exactly where she was and where she wanted to go. I didn't follow the route, not yet, I told her, in the pantomime we had built, that she wasn't healed enough. She did not like this. She made her opinion on the subject very clear. I made soup and walked away again. By the eighth day she said her first word in Common Galactic. It was, why. Not where, or help, or even her own name. Just, why. Directed at me, across the small table in the galley, with those compound eyes studying my face like she was reading text printed on my skin. Why what? I asked. She touched the splint on her upper limb, then she pointed at me. I shrugged. Because you were alive. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she looked away, and I had no idea what she was thinking. But something about the silence felt heavy, in a way I couldn't explain. I found out who she was on the 9th day, when I finally picked up a stable news signal and half-listened to the galactic broadcast while repairing a fuel coupling in the engine bay. The voice of the broadcaster was calm and formal in the way that broadcasters get when they are delivering news too large for ordinary tone. Princess Serene Velathari, first wing of the Athari Imperium, confirmed dead at the Battle of the Shattered Veil. Memorial proceedings to begin across the Imperium. Succession Council, convening within the week. I stopped what I was doing. I walked to the medical bay, and she was sitting on the cot reading my star charts again, with that single working limb, and she looked up when I came in, and I looked at her, and I said, "You're her, aren't you?" She set the chart down. She looked at me with those vast compound eyes that gave nothing away, and everything away at the same time. "I was wondering," she said, in Common Galactic that was already better than it had any right to be after 9 days, "when you would figure that out." I sat down on the floor, because my legs made the decision before my brain finished processing the situation. The princess of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy was sitting on my second-hand cot in my converted storage room, with my duct tape on her arm and my soup in her stomach. She formally introduced herself with the kind of quiet dignity that probably looked exactly the same in a throne room as it did in a cargo hauler. Every title, every designation, delivered without performance or vanity, as though she was simply stating facts about the weather. Then she asked if there was more soup. I laughed. It came out strange, too loud, a little broken, but it was real, and she watched it happen with visible curiosity, and I decided that laughing was better than the alternative, which was to sit there quietly, understanding that I had accidentally become the most important and most endangered person in the galaxy, because the bounty notice arrived 4 hours later, not for her, for whoever had her. The enemy faction, a coalition inside the Athari political structure that had everything to gain from her death and nothing to gain from her return, had placed a contract on anyone harboring the missing princess. They didn't know she was alive. They didn't know where she was, but they were looking, and they were looking with the kind of resources that made my little cargo hauler feel very small against a very large dark sky. Serene took the news with a stillness that I had already come to recognize as her version of controlled intensity. She read the bounty notice over my shoulder, and then she straightened, and she said, "You should put me off at the nearest station. It would be safer for you." "Probably," I said. "You will not do this," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, "I won't." She was quiet for a moment. "You didn't know who I was when you saved me. Now you know, and you know what it costs, and you are still going to help me. That's the plan." "Why?" she said. The same word, the first word, but it meant something different now. I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "Because I started something," I said. "I don't leave things unfinished, and because you're still alive, and keeping you that way still seems like the right direction to go." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said something in High Athari, soft, almost musical, the first time I had heard her speak in her own language, and when I asked her to translate, she was quiet for a beat before she said, "It does not translate well. It is something like, 'You are a very strange creature.' People say that," I told her. The mercenaries found us 2 days later, 4 of them, in a fast intercept ship that came out of a debris shadow and locked on before I had finished my morning coffee. They were professional, well-equipped, and very confident, which told me they had done this kind of work before and expected it to go smoothly. It did not go smoothly. I am not the strongest person in any room I walk into. I am not the fastest or the best armed or the most intimidating. What I am is someone who grew up on colony worlds, where things went wrong constantly, and the people who survived were the ones who kept thinking when everything got loud and frightening and painful. I fought through that ship with the kind of stubborn, grinding persistence that has no elegance to it at all, taking hits I should have avoided, using every surface and angle and shadow the ship offered, refusing to stop moving, because the moment I stopped moving was the moment the situation would make a decision for me. Serene fought beside me with 3 functional limbs and a fracture in her carapace, and she moved with a precision and economy that was completely unlike my own approach, and somehow the two of us together made something that worked. Her stillness and my chaos, her calculation and my refusal to accept the calculation. We won. It was not pretty. The obstinate took damage she did not need and would not forget. Afterward, in the quiet that follows that kind of thing, Serene looked at me and said, "You fight like you are personally angry at the possibility of losing." "I am," I said. "Always have been." She considered this. "Among my people, a battle is evaluated for its efficiency, the loss of resources, the expenditure of effort. What you did was deeply inefficient. Did it work?" A pause. "Yes." "Then it was efficient enough." The journey to Athari space took 3 more days, and they were the strangest and most unexpectedly meaningful days I can remember. We talked. Really talked. The way you only can when the immediate emergency has passed and there is nothing left to do but be honest. She told me about the chorus, the great collective song of the Athari civilization, the way every voice added to it, and the way hers had gone silent when she was declared dead, and the grief that had moved through her people like a wound. I told her about Earth, about humanity's long and difficult history of almost not making it, the wars, and the losses, and the stubborn, costly, irrational insistence that we keep going, and keep reaching back for the ones we almost left behind. She listened to all of it with the full, absolute attention that I had come to understand was simply how she listened to everything. "Your people built an entire philosophy around the idea that one life is worth returning for," she said. "Something like that," I said. "That is very expensive. We know. And yet you," she paused, searching for the words. "You don't seem to consider the cost before you act. You pulled me from that pod before you knew anything about me. Before there was any reason. You were breathing," I said. "That was the reason." She went quiet again. And in the silence I watched something shift in her. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories, but the way real understanding moves through a person, slowly and permanently, rearranging things that had always been in fixed positions. When Athari space appeared on my nav display, her entire fleet materialized around us within minutes, warship after warship, emerging from the dark in silent, overwhelming formation. It was the most powerful display of force I had ever witnessed, and it was an honor guard for the woman sitting in my co-pilot seat. I could have handed her off at the border. Should have, probably. I flew her all the way home. When the docking bay of the flagship received us and her advisors and generals flooded in with the organized urgency of people who had been holding a crisis together with both hands for 2 weeks, one of her senior commanders looked at me, really looked at me, one human being in a rusted cargo hauler, and asked how I had managed to do what the entire Athari military had failed to do. Serene answered before I could open my mouth. "He didn't stop," she said simply. "It never occurred to him to stop." She walked me to my ship when it was time to leave. Alone, no ceremony, no audience. At the ramp, she placed one carefully healed limb on my shoulder and held it there. Formal, deliberate, the way you do something that carries weight in your culture. "The chorus will remember your name," she said. "Don't make it weird," I said, and she almost smiled. I was certain of it. I flew back out into the dark alone, just me and my dented ship, and a bite mark on my arm that had faded to almost nothing. People ask me, when they hear the story, what it felt like to do something that size. I tell them it didn't feel like anything that size. It felt like a decision I made before I was fully awake, in a debris field on an ordinary day, because a scanner showed a warm signal, and I have never been able to look at a warm signal and fly the other direction. Maybe that's a flaw. Maybe it's just what I am. Either way, she came home, and I still think that's the only part of the story that actually matters.